Today on Dirt Gear TV, I'm going to be showing you how to diagnose and repair an old broken down generator. So this is what we're working with today. We've got an older Coleman powermate 4000. Now I don't know much about this generator. I got it as a freebie, but what I do know is that it's not running. The only thing that I have done so far to this generator is I've pulled it over a bunch of times, I put fresh fuel in it, and I made sure that the fuel filter was not clogged up. So it is getting fuel, and it will not run, it won't sputter, absolutely nothing. One of the first things I noticed here with this generator is the writing here, this electric generator with low oil shutoff. So without knowing anything about the history of this, that's where I'm going to start. So let's go ahead and check to make sure that this actually has oil in it, and that's not causing a problem. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is make sure that the engine has oil. So we'll pull the oil filler off here. Because there's no dipstick on these engines, we just want to make sure that the oil is actually in here and coming up to a reasonable level. Yeah, there's definitely plenty of oil in here. The oil is about level with the oil fill, which, as far as I'm aware, these engines, that's the correct fill amount. Now, the other thing that you're going to want to do is obviously check to make sure that the engine is getting fuel. Now, I've already checked this engine, but let's just go through the steps as if I had not. I'll pull the fuel line off here. Okay, so we know that the engine is getting fuel. Okay, we don't have a clogged fuel filter. So let's move on to the next step. So if you get to this point and those aren't a problem, then we are going to need to go ahead and start pulling this thing apart. First things first, let's go ahead and pull the fuel tank off this. Okay, so once you've got the fuel tank removed, what we want to do is we want to make sure that this engine has spark. Remember, there's three things that an engine has to run. It's got to have fuel, we know it's getting fuel, it's got to have compression, and it's got to have spark. So let's go ahead and check to make sure that this engine's sparking as we need it to. What we're going to do is just pull off the spark plug here. Alright, let's go ahead and pull this over and see if we have any spark. Okay, so at this point, here's what we know. We know the engine has fuel, the engine has no spark, so it's never going to run without spark. So I'm going to continue to pull this engine apart here. I'm going to take off these engine shrouds over here so we can kind of diagnose the next step in the process. Okay, so now that we've removed our engine shroud and the air filter here, what we're going to want to do is take a look at the coil. Okay, so as you can see, the coil on this engine is pretty darn old. Looks pretty beat up here. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull this coil out of here. Now, what we have here is an eBay special that should work for this engine. Good contact with the engine. Make sure the switch is in the on position. We're getting a little bit of spark, but I think that we're not getting enough of a spark. We know that we have some spark happening. So we're going to continue to diagnose some of the electrical components in this, and the first one that I want to take a look at is the low oil cutoff switch. So what I'm going to do is we're actually going to disconnect and just entirely bypass our low oil cutoff switch here. So I am simply going to disconnect our low oil cutoff. Okay, and then we're going to turn the engine over again and we're going to check our spark. Okay, I don't know if you can see that. Let me bring you in a little bit closer here. All right, fantastic. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to put this back together enough with the shroud and the rest of the engine so that we can turn it over and see if we can get this thing to start. Okay, so I've got the shroud back on and I've got the gas tank here. We're going to go ahead and open our fuel valve back up again. Let some fuel drain into the carb there. And let's go ahead and see if we can get it to fire up this time. Okay, so towards the end there, you'll notice that the engine was not running very well, and then as I adjusted that needle valve, the jetting on the engine, you saw it pick up speed and then it eventually stopped stuttering and it ran very well. So basically what I was doing, if you noticed when I first fired up this engine, it was blowing a lot of black smoke. To me, that's an indication that the engine is running rich, which means that the engine's receiving too much fuel and not enough air. So knowing that, what I did was I closed that needle valve down here on the engine. And it took about anywhere from about half to 3/4 of a turn in to close that valve, which then stops the fuel from entering the carburetor, or a little bit more of the fuel from entering the carburetor, therefore leaning out the mixture in the engine. You're probably wondering what was actually wrong with the engine. What was the problem? Well, we actually had a combination of different things happening here with the engine. So we had both a bad coil and we had a faulty low oil cutoff switch. So by removing the wire from the low oil cutoff switch, we completely take that out of the equation, and then by replacing the coil, we've got our spark, we've got a good strong spark going. Now, again, if those things had not been the problem, if you had a spark to begin with, the two other things that you would want to check would be your compression and make sure that the engine and the carburetor is receiving fuel. So by simply following those three principles of spark, fuel, and compression, we were able to diagnose this old Briggs and Stratton generator here and get the thing running beautifully. So hopefully you guys have found this video useful, and maybe it'll help you to diagnose an engine that you're working on. If you haven't done so already, please hit that subscribe button because we're going to be bringing you a lot more content like this. I'm Rick with Dirt Gear TV. I appreciate you watching, and we'll see you next time.